boy in purple. I'm not sure how they came to be out in the forest in the dead of winter, but there they were. 5 children all dressed in red, leaving 5 sets of little footprints in the deep white snow. There was a set of rubber galoshes being walked in by a girl named Kylie. There was a pair of tennis shoes with plastic bags over them. And those tiny shoes were being worn by her brother, Hunter. The pink snow boots that were rising and thunking in the snow were on little Maggie. The tan cowboy boots were on Carter. And the shoes out front leading the way were on Autumn, the oldest one of the bunch. Overhead, the bright moon was beaming down through the snow-covered boughs of giant fir trees, making them sparkle like a billion tiny Christmas lights. The clouds had just recently parted, having exhausted themselves in covering the world of these children in white. As the moments passed by and the trail of footprints grew longer behind them, each child was absorbed in his or her own thoughts. Kylie was wondering why her red mittens had to be made of yarn, for the yarn was a poor defense against the cold, and her fingers were beginning to shiver. Hunter was wondering what happened to a nose when it got frostbitten. Would it fall off? Would it freeze and break? He never remembered anybody telling him the answers to these pressing questions. Carter was in full adventure mode, imagining himself as the leader of a great posse, chasing a band of villains through the woods until he found and captured every last one of them. Autumn was concerned. As the oldest, she knew she was responsible for all the others, but at her young age, that was quite a burden to carry. Maggie was wishing about home. I want to say she was wishing about home. That may sound an odd way to put it, until you understand that she actually couldn't remember where or even what home was. In fact, none of them could. They couldn't remember mothers or fathers or beds or kitchen tables or warm baths or clean sheets or fluffy blankets. 5 children all dressed in red, walking through the snow of white under a black sky with no memory of the warm colors of home. Many miles away on the other side of the forest walked another 5 children dressed all in black, with 5 pairs of black mittens knocking snow off the tree branches as they passed by. The first pair of mittens was covering the hands of a young girl named Ashton. The second pair of mittens was on her cousin Katie, who looked just a tiny bit scared, and from time to time paused to brush away a frightened tear. The third pair of mittens was on a boy named Andrew, and those mittens were balled up in fists, ready to fight, as if he were expecting something scary to jump out from behind a tree. The fourth pair of mittens was on a brave little boy named Riot, and mittens number 5 belonged to a sweet little girl named Georgia. None of these children seemed to know who was leading the way, or even if there was a way. Like the first set of children on the other side of the forest, these children didn't know where they came from or where they were going. What they did know was a very short list. They knew they were cold. They knew they couldn't simply stand still or they'd freeze. And they knew there seemed to be a pathway leading ahead of them into the forest. So they followed the pathway, small though it was, while their black mittens just kept knocking snow off the tree branches as they passed by. Presently, the children in black began to hear a low, growling noise. Grrr, grrr, grrr. Each of the children stopped dead in their tracks. The imagination of each began to run wild. Georgia imagined a big wild bear with giant teeth and sharp claws, and she began to tremble. Andrew imagined a fierce, hungry mountain lion, one that had a taste for little boys, and he began to shake. Riot imagined a terrible snow-white gorilla rushing into the midst and carrying him away, and began to turn white with fright. Ashton began to imagine a horrible monster with 3 eyes, and she began to cry just a little. Katie began to imagine a pancake with steaming hot syrup. And her stomach growled yet again. Grr, grr, grr. She began to giggle. Back on the other side of the forest, miles away from the children in black and their growling monster, the children in red continued to trudge wearily along. As they did, they began to hear an unmistakable noise up ahead of them, the sound of fast-running water. Louder and louder its roaring grew until they were standing on its banks. A wide, cold, dangerous river. Its waters tossed about, foaming up white and refused to freeze over. The waters were dark and deep, and the children in red just stood and looked at it, unsure of what to do next. Finally, one of them began to speak. "We've got to keep going," said Carter. "The bad guys are getting away." "If the bad guys tried to cross this river, they've all drowned by now," said Maggie. Kylie chimed in with, "And if we try to cross it, we'll drown along with them." "But there's only one thing we can do," said Autumn. "We have to turn around and go back the way we came." Oh, the howling that followed. Cries of, "My feet hurt, and I'm too tired to go back, but we've come so far." Louder and louder the argument grew till it seemed that the trees themselves were covering their ears with their branches. Finally, one voice screamed at the top of its lungs, bringing the shouting of the others to an abrupt halt. It was Hunter, and the words he screamed were, "We can't go back the way we came! Look!" All the others looked at his arm, pointing back, and their eyes followed that pointing arm. A collective gasp went up from all four, who were just now seeing what he had seen. Behind them, as if by magic, the snow had fallen yet again. They'd been walking under the moonlight of the clear sky, but the snow had fallen just feet behind them every step of the way. Hunter was right. They couldn't go back the way they came, even if they wanted to. There was no track, no trail, no way at all to find the pathway they'd just been walking on. The trees themselves seemed to have closed in and formed a wall behind them, the impenetrable branches daring them to try to go any way but forward. With no way back, all five of the children in red turned again to the roaring river in front of them. They stared and stared and stared, completely unsure of what to do next. So they did what came naturally and started howling and fussing at each other all over again with a noise near deafening. It was then that they heard a voice, and each of the five jumped in fright, knowing that it was not from any of them. They quickly turned and saw a little boy and a little girl holding hands and staring at them. The little boy said, "I said, why don't you just cross the bridge?" Pax and Maisie. I should tell you that those are the names of these two new children who now stood in the woods across the five children in red. They were brother and sister, and they were dressed all in white. As the children in red stood and stared at them, Pax spoke yet again. "If you want to cross the river, you have to take the bridge." He pointed off to his right, just a bit upstream, and all the eyes of the children in red followed. Autumn was the first one to speak up and say what all the others were thinking. "What bridge? I don't see a bridge." "That's right there," said Pax. "Right there by that big rock." Well, as their eyes followed his arm and instructions, all five sets of them grew very wide. "Do you mean," said Kylie, "that skinny little log across the river?" "Well, that's it," said Pax, "or at least what's left of it. I've been meaning to cross it for a while now, but I just haven't quite got around to it." "You mean," said Maggie, "that you're scared?" "It's okay. Who wouldn't be? If anybody tries to cross over that and falls or breaks, he's done for. There's no way any of us are going to try to go across that." "Actually, we may not have a choice," said Kylie. "Look." And as she pointed behind them, everyone turned to see and gasped yet again. It was impossible, yet it was unmistakable. The trees behind them that had been a good 30 feet from the river's edge were now just 10 feet away. "It's impossible. It can't be happening," said Hunter. "But it is," said Autumn, "and we need to do something in a hurry." "All I want to do is go home," said Maggie, who was beginning to cry, "but I can't even remember it. I don't like this. I want to remember. I want to be warm. I want to be safe. I don't want to be in this dark, cold forest anymore." "I know," said Autumn. "None of us do. We need to focus on what's right ahead of us for now. We have to cross that bridge, or all of us will end up getting pushed into the river, and none of us will ever get home. Come on, everybody, follow me." And with that, she led the other four children in red and two new children in white to the edge of a black river and started out uncertainly across a bridge that she did not trust, not even a little bit. On the other side of the forest, the children in black continued to walk along. All of them now had growling stomachs, and nobody was giggling anymore. They were cold, they were scared, they were hungry, but there seemed to be no remedy for any of those three problems. Above all, they couldn't remember why they were in the woods to begin with, or where they came from, or how to get out. They remembered their names. They remembered that the color they were wearing was called black, but they just couldn't remember much of anything else. Step by step, they continued to traverse the snow-filled forest, but the scenery never seemed to change. Here a tree, there a tree, here a tree, there a tree, here a tree, there a tree, mile after mile, and still their bodies were no warmer, and their stomachs grew only emptier. "Trees, trees, trees, snow, snow, snow. I am sick of trees and snow," said Ashton. "We all are," said Katie, "but it's not like we can do much about it." "We can keep walking," said Andrew. "It's good for us. It'll build character." "What's character?" said Wright. "Why would any of us want to build it? Will it keep us warm?" Well, to which Andrew replied, "I'm not really sure what it is, or if it'll keep us warm, or even where I've heard of it before. It's just stuck in my head for some reason." "But I'm interested in food right now, not character," said Ashton. "Well, we don't have any food," said Katie, "so we may as well quit thinking about it." It was that moment that Andrew saw something he could scarcely believe he was now seeing. It was as if it had appeared from out of nowhere. It was a beautiful-looking bush with delicious-looking berries on it. He shouted out to the others, "Look, a berry bush! We don't have to be hungry anymore!" And he leapt for the bush, but he didn't quite make it. He ran into a stout little body. It was brave little Wright who'd come between him and the bush. Andrew got up crossly and said, "Now what you going to do that for? There's enough berries for all of us. You didn't have to go and get all selfish." "I'm not getting selfish," said Wright. "I'm trying to help you. We don't know one thing about those berries. What if they're poison?" "Why would you say something like that?" asked Andrew. "They look fine to me." "Really?" said Wright. "I'm not so sure. We just passed by that way, and I don't remember seeing that bush. And now all of a sudden, here it is. That just concerns me a little." "Oh, come on," said Andrew. "None of us can remember anything, now can we? Out of my way so we can eat the fruit. I'm hungry, and I'm in no mood to argue with you." But argue they did. All of them. Seems they were pretty well divided as whether or not it was safe to eat the fruit. And that argument may have gone on for a very long time, except for the fact that at that very moment they heard someone speak. "When I'm thinking about food," said the brand new voice, "I reach in my pack and I get some. 10 feet, 2 per person. Each attached to a child in black clothing jumped into the air. When those feet landed, the 5 bodies they were attached to whirled around to see the source of the new voice. It was a little boy of about 7, dressed in purple. He was smiling, chewing on an apple. His clothing was shabby and poor, but he didn't seem to mind at all being out in the cold. In yet another area of the forest, there was yet another group of children. And as you may have guessed by now, they had no idea where they came from or where they were going. They were all dressed in yellow. This larger group of children had names like Lily, Anna, Izzy, Maddox, Ava, Titus, Zach, Dakota, Darcy, Miranda, Ava, Alea, Aiden, Elena, Richard, Joshua, Ava, Hannah, Aiden, Cooper, Emmanuel, Carson, Raven, Wellesley, Mason, Olivia, Jeffrey, Maya, Noah, Edwin, Erica, Harley, Kenneth Lee, Lillian, Miley. They too trudged wearily through the snow, leaving a wide path with their many feet, and seemed to be herded along by the trees of the forest along the path that it wanted them to take. These children, like the others, were scared and cold and tired and hungry, but they were also very kind. And if you could have watched them trudging through the snow, you'd have seen them often stopping to help one another whenever anybody failed. Like good children, they weren't selfish. They were very kind. They were the kind of kids to welcome other new kids into their group and make them feel at home. But just now, this big group of kids did not seem happy. They all knew they'd each gone to sleep in a warm bed the night before, but none of them could remember what a bed was or how to get back to it. They felt like they all knew each other, but they couldn't be quite sure. Had they met in the forest, or had they always known each other? None of them were dressed warmly at all. Their yellow clothing was thin and worn. Aiden had just suggested that they build a fire for warmth, but that brought cries of, "What's a fire?" from Anna, Brianna, and Max. Ava and Titus and Zach tried to explain it to them, but even after doing so, Dakota and Darcy and Miranda pointed out they had no matches. Between all of them, the entire contents of their pockets was as follows: a piece of gum, a piece of lint of unknown origin, 2 Kleenexes, a frog, and a Jolly Rancher. Ava, Alea were busy taking turns carrying little Ashton because her feet were cold all the way up to the knees. Didn't seem like she could walk much further. If they didn't find a way to get warm soon, they were going to be in serious trouble, especially little Ashton. Now, even though the children in yellow didn't have on thick clothing, 3 of them did at least have a little thin yellow jacket on. Those 3 that had on the thin yellow jackets had only thin t-shirts on underneath. All of them had secretly been thinking that one of them, preferably one of the other 2, should give little Ashton his or her jacket since she was the littlest of all. But whoever did would end up being very cold to his or her own self, and the wind was a very biting and cold wind that night. Finally, Ava took off her thin yellow jacket and handed it to Ashton. Little Ashton looked up at her and said, "But you'll get cold and maybe get real sick." To which Ava replied, "Oh, don't worry. I'm used to the cold." But she really wasn't. She just didn't want little Ashton to worry. From there, they continued to walk, and they walked for what seemed like hours. Now, the funny thing about getting very cold is this. At some point, you begin to feel very warm again, even though there's no reason for you to. And then you get very sleepy, even though it's very dangerous to go to sleep when you're out in the cold. This very thing happened to the children, especially to Ava, who'd given her little coat to Ashton. And it was Ava, the coldest and the tiredest, who first saw the forest beds. You've probably never heard of forest beds. Probably no one ever has. Forest beds are what I call them in the story simply because that's the best way I can think of to describe them. There were 36 of them, one for each child. The fir trees of the forest had shed some of their very softest looking limbs into piles. The snow seemed not to have touched them at all, and each child gasped as he or she saw them. Took no time at all for the kids to be staggering towards those forest beds, ready in an instant to lay down in them and go to sleep, not caring if they ever woke up again. They were mumbling words like bed and sleep and tired and cold and so on. But as they staggered towards those forest beds, mumbling those words, another little voice spoke up. It was a new voice, a voice that kids in yellow hadn't heard before. As they whirled around to see who'd just spoken, the voice spoke again. I said, that's awfully nice of you to have given her your jacket. That's exactly what my dad would ask you to do if he were here. The voice was from yet another little boy, about 7 years old, dressed all in purple. He smiled and spoke yet again. But none of you are dressed for this kind of weather, and those beds aren't safe. It's going to get much colder tonight. It just so happens I have some matches in my pack. Would you like to use them to start a fire? The water beneath her was churning and raging, as if it was trying to reach up with icy hands and drag her into its depths. But one step at a time, back at the bridge, oh, so carefully, barely breathing, Autumn made her way across the log that had once been part of the bridge. When she finally stepped off of it onto the far bank, she laid in the snow for a moment and cried softly, grateful to be alive. Then, mindful of the fact that the others were watching her, she brushed away her tears, forced a smile, and said to them, see, it's fine. Just cross it slowly, one at a time, and we'll be okay. Pax and Maisie went first. Autumn had said one at a time, and Maisie was really too little to try it on her own, so Pax went with her, holding her hand. It took just 10 minutes, but it seemed like hours. Finally, though, they made their way across and stepped on the other side. Kylie was next. Her trip was a bit more harrowing than those that had gone before her, for the bottoms of her rubber galoshes were quite smooth, and more than once she nearly slipped and fell off. Hunter came next, and very, very slowly went across it, but without incident. Carter followed Hunter, and though he tried very hard to be brave, he shook like a leaf all the way across. That left only one, Maggie, on the far side. Her little pink snow boots trembled as she stepped out on the little log. As she did so, the howling wind of the trees began to increase, to deepen, to become more ominous. As she listened, it seemed like she could actually hear the wind and the trees speaking together, calling her name, laughing darkly at her, telling her she was going to slip and fall. If that wasn't scary enough, the river itself began to rage harder than ever, even managing to splash up onto the log, making it wetter and slippier than it had ever been. Seeing all of this, little Maggie's courage began to waver, and she stopped halfway across the log. The poor little thing dropped down onto her face, grabbed the log, and began to hold on for dear life. All the while, she could hear a sweet, pleasant voice that seemed to be coming from the water itself, calling to her, telling her it was safe. Just let go and drop into the water. Then she heard her name being called by many voices. Maggie! 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 But she refused to answer. She just lay there and held on tighter. The water continued to rise. The wind blew even harder. Very soon the log would be swept away with her still holding tightly to it. As she cried and held on, she felt something on her shoulder, and she could hear her name again from one of those voices that had been calling her. This time it was from right above her. It was Hunter. He was back on the log, but he wasn't alone. Holding his hand was Carter, and holding his hand was Kylie, and holding her hand was Pax, and holding his hand on the far bank was Autumn. He reached down, took her by the hand, helped her to his feet, and smiled and bravely said, we're not across until you're across. Now let's get across. Back on the other side of the forest, the children in black sat under the boughs of a giant fir tree with their new friend, the little boy in purple. The boughs of the trees nearly touched the ground, so the area underneath the branches was well shielded from the howling winds of the forest. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't as bitterly cold either. Best of all, though, their stomachs were getting full. The amazing little boy in purple, who seemed to have come out of nowhere, had shared the contents of his pack with them. Seemed like such a small pack, and he such a small boy, but each received an apple and a fresh, warm piece of bread. And did you notice that I referred to the little boy as amazing? I have good reason to do so. It wasn't just the fact that he was able to feed them from his tiny pack. After speaking with the children in black for just a few moments, it slowly dawned on all of them that he'd been calling them by name, even though they'd never met him before. That thought startled them all at once, but just as quickly the feeling passed. It seemed to be very easy and comforting to be around him, though there wasn't anything around him special to meet the eye. He seemed to be just an average, normal, ordinary-looking little boy. His smile was a bit crooked. His hair was a normal, ordinary brown color. He had lots and lots of freckles. He wasn't ugly. He wasn't handsome. He was just, well, ordinary. We're trying to learn something about him. Ashton asked, Where were you born? His accent seemed different. She just couldn't seem to place it. Didn't seem to be from anywhere that she knew, even though she still didn't even know where she herself was from. Me? Oh, I was born right here, said the little boy in purple, right here in this forest. Wow, said Katie, so you're from here? Nope, I'm not from here, he said. But you just said you were born here, said Andrew. He's right. You did say that. That's right. The little boy in purple smiled and said, that's right. I was born here. But Georgia just stared with her mouth open, wondering at this odd, amazing, ordinary, thoroughly confusing little boy. Behind them was a little log bridge, a raging river and a line of frowning trees. Ahead of them, meaning the 5 children in red and 2 in white, was something that simply hadn't been there just a few moments ago, a pathway. And I don't mean a little woodsy pathway through the trees. I mean an actual pathway with cobblestones and pretty hedges on each side. The snow seemed to be consciously avoiding it, leaving it absolutely clear. The path itself was wide, very wide, too wide almost. Way down it, they could see a house, a warm-looking, inviting, well-lit house. It was a house that seemed to say, come on in. Everything will be all right. It's warm and cozy in here, so just walk this way and come in. There was smoke rising from the chimney. It had a sweet but unidentifiable smell to it. Hunter said it smelled like gingerbread. Kylie thought it was chocolate. Carter said it was cotton candy. Autumn believed it was cocoa. Only Maggie voiced a contrary opinion. Smells like trouble to me, she said. Trouble, said Hunter. What makes you think it smells like trouble? We've been out in this forest for who knows how long. We're tired, we're hungry, we're cold. I think a warm path and a house, or a warm house down the pathway ahead of us is exactly what we need. I know, said Maggie, but I remember something. I can't remember from where, but it scares me a little. This pathway is so very wide, unnaturally so. Reminds me of something I heard somewhere about a wide pathway leading to destruction. At that, the other children began to disagree with her, but they did so very kindly, as good children should do. It's very bad behavior for children to be ugly to each other when they disagree, and these were not bad children. So they began to kindly explain to her why she was wrong. Autumn reminded her that she was very young. Hunter reminded her that she was cold, just like the rest of them. Kylie pointed out her stomach had been growling as they walked. Carter reminded her of the bad guys that were getting away. The trail was getting cold. It was then, though, that another opinion was voiced. From behind them, a small voice said, everything that you said may be true. And he winked at Carter as he said it. But Maggie is still correct. As you may have guessed by now, the one speaking was a little boy of about 7, dressed in shabby purple clothes. The little boy continued saying, the thing she remembers goes like this. Wide is the gate and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be that go in thereat. And in fact, this wide pathway that looks so good is a very dangerous pathway. And I recommend you stay as far away from it as possible. Each of the children really wanted to disagree with this little boy, but none of them could seem to find the voice to do so. Each of them began to hope that one of the others would disagree with them, but there was nothing but silence. So the little boy in purple smiled sweetly and began to speak again. The way I see it, you have 2 choices. You can go ahead and walk down that pathway and into that house that seems so warm and inviting, which is what all of you really want to do anyway. Or you can follow me in a different direction, away from that pathway, back out into the forest, even though you've never met me and you don't know me. Just a moment later, there were tracks from 7 trusted children following a strange little boy in purple out into the snow. Back in the other part of the forest, the cold of the wind and snow was being kept at bay by a warm, roaring, crackling fire. All the children in yellow sat gathered around it along with their new friend, the amazing little boy in purple. Now, it's amazing how getting warm will change your problems. An hour before, every one of the children in yellow, Lily, Anna, Izzy, Maddox, Ava, Titus, Zach, Dakota, Darcy, Miranda, Ava, Alea, Aiden, Elena, Richard, Joshua, Hannah, Aiden, Cooper, Emmanuel, Carson, Raiden, Wellesley, Mason, Olivia, Jeffrey, Maya, Noah, Edwin, Erica, Harley, Kenneth Lee, Lily, and Miley had only cared about one thing, and that was not being cold. But now that they were warm, it suddenly began to be very important to them to start figuring things out. They wanted to know who they were. They wanted to know where they were from. They wanted to know how to get back. And above all, they had the strangest and strongest desire to know everything they could about their new little friend. So they began to ask him questions. Did he answer them? Well, yes, he did, but his answers always seemed to be wrapped in mystery. Ava asked him how he found them out in the forest, and he answered, finding people who need finding is what I came to do. Zach asked him how old he was, and he said, well, that depends on if you mean how long since I was born or something else. Izzy wanted to know who his parents were, and he simply said, well, if you've seen me, you've seen my father. It went on like that for quite a while, with the children in yellow asking him question after question, and him answering in such a way that they weren't really sure whether he answered them or not. Somehow they knew that they should know exactly what he was talking about, but they just couldn't quite get it. Finally, Miranda changed the subject and asked about themselves. All these kids in yellow out in the snow, why they were there, and where they came from. At that, things changed. The answers he gave were still a bit mysterious, but the little boy giving those answers fell somber as he gave them. All of you were brought here in your own will, but against the will of my Father. You were brought here by an enemy who made you forget where you came from. He brought you in this place to destroy you. And unless somebody stops him, he will. And it isn't just you. I have other sheep of this fold, and I came for them too. Sheep? Darcy said. What are you talking about? I don't see any sheep here at all. Lift up your eyes, said the little boy in purple. The fields are white into harvest. And I'm not talking about white with snow. Come, we need to go and meet the others who've already met me. It's time for the final showdown with our common enemy. From various points of the forest, the little boy in purple, and the little boy in purple, and the little boy in purple led the children in red, and the children in black, and the children in white, and the children in yellow toward the very heart of the forest. Every step toward the center was darker, colder, deeper in snow. Every moment that passed saw the wind rage more fiercely and bite harder through the thin clothing of the children. The poor little things began to shiver well-nigh uncontrollably, and their tears froze upon their cheeks as they cried silently through the painful cold. But always up ahead, always calling out them cheerfully just to take another step or two, was the boy in purple. They could hear him saying things like, and he went a little farther, and things like, the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. They all walked for what seemed like hours, just when it seemed like they couldn't take another step. All the children in red, the children in black, the children in white, the children in yellow fell into a clearing. The little boy in purple was right there in the middle of them all. The children in black thought he'd come with them. The children in red thought he'd come with them. The children in yellow and white thought he'd come with them. Now, when I call it a clearing, it wasn't clear of snow, mind you. It was clear of wind and noise and any and all distractions. It was as if they'd entered a bubble in the raging storm where anyone could hear a pin drop. And they did. Not a dropping, not a pin of any kind, but a voice. A soothing, calm, pleasant voice, as if they were hearing an angel. And looking up, they were instantly convinced that they were. An angel, or something that sure looked like what they imagined an angel must look like, stood towering over the little boy in shabby clothes of purple. He was looking past the little boy and speaking to all the children. Welcome, welcome to my home and your home. I see that you've been having some trouble out in the forest. I certainly wish that had not been the case. This is my forest. I keep it and tend to it with the greatest of care. I brought you out here. I've tried my best to keep you from trouble, but this little troublemaker in purple has been steering you toward trouble as hard as he can. What do you mean? Said Autumn. He was there to guide us away from the dangerous path and dangerous house. Dangerous? Said the angel incredulously. Why, whatever do you think about the house and the path were dangerous? Nothing could be farther from the truth. I simply wanted to make you warm and feed you with sweets and make you happy. And I would have if you'd only taken the path I laid out for you. Wait a minute, said Olivia. I didn't know what those other kids are talking about, but I do know that it kept us away from those dangerous forest beds. Dangerous? Again with that word, said the angel. Dear child, those beds would have given you the best, longest, sweetest sleep you could ever imagine. No, child, those beds aren't dangerous. I'm afraid this little lad has steered you very wrong. Mister, said Katie, you have no idea what this little boy did for us. When we were hungry, he fed us from his own pack. Oh, yes, child, I'm quite aware of that, said the angel. I know all about the rotten apples. and stale bread he fed you. But didn't you see the sweet berry bush I provided for you? None of the children, now the children of black began to be very confused. Earlier, when they'd eaten the apple and bread from the little boy's pack, they seemed to be sweet and fresh. But now their memories seemed to be changing second by second until they were practically sick at the stomach of what they'd eaten. The angel smiled again, a sweet, pleasant smile. He talked at length to the children until all their feelings toward the little boy in purple had changed. He seemed now to be nothing more than a troublemaker, and perhaps the source of all the cold and hunger and weariness they felt for all the time they'd been in the forest. And as they thought on these things, they began to get angry, so very angry at him. Suddenly they turned toward him, and if you could have seen the looks on their faces, you'd have been frightened for the little boy. I believe that even good children that they were going to harm and maybe even kill that little boy that they regarded as the source of all their problems. But then a voice spoke up, the littlest voice of all. It was little Maisie, and as she spoke, she was looking up at the angel. "Where were you?" she asked. "What do you mean, child?" he responded. "You weren't out there with us," she said, "but the little boy in purple was. You say you were doing all kinds of nice things for us, but he came out in the cold to find us. Where were you?" Suddenly it seemed as if a fog was lifting from everybody's mind. The next one to speak was Ashton, who said, "What's my name?" "Excuse me," said the angel. "I said," she repeated, "what's my name?" The angel began to stammer a bit. Well, to which she replied while pointing to the boy in purple, "He knew my name. When I couldn't even remember who I was or where I was from, he knew my name." It didn't stop there. Pax said, "What's up with the bridge?" What do you mean?" said the angel. "You said this is your forest, and that you brought us out here, and that you tended the forest with the greatest of care," said Pax. "So why did we all nearly get killed crossing that pitiful bridge? And for that matter," said Maggie, "I've been trying to figure out for the last few minutes where I've heard your voice before. And now I remember. Your voice was the one from the water telling me that it was safe and just to let go and drop in. I don't trust you, not even a little bit." All during the time the angel and the children had been talking and then arguing, the little boy in purple had stood silently by like a lamb, not opening his mouth. Finally he spoke, not to the children, but to the angel. "You've had your chance, and you've lost. Come to me, all of you." In an instant, with no hesitation whatsoever, every child, whether in black, red, yellow, or white, came to him and crowded behind him. They were young, but they weren't foolish. Something about this angel was far from angelic, and everything about the boy was somehow just right. They didn't know him, but they trusted him. They couldn't remember where he had come from, but they were willing to follow him anywhere. There was a moment of silence, and the angel spoke again, but this time his voice had changed. No longer sweet and soothing. Now his voice was low and threatening. In fact, his entire face had changed. He still seemed to have the shape and form of an angel, but somehow there was an evil, a darkness, a malice about him. "It's not that simple," he said to the boy in purple. "These children heard me call to them. They came into my forest willingly." In a flash, every child remembered. Each one remembered their own home, their very own parents, their very own room, and their very own bed. And each one of them also remembered hearing the voice of this dark angel who now stood before them, calling them to the forest. Each one had chosen willingly to come. And the moment that he or she stepped into the forest, they could no longer remember where they came from or where they needed to get back to. "Yes, you're correct," said the little boy in purple. "They did come out here willingly. And I've come out here willingly to take them back." "You," said the dark angel, "you will do no such thing. I don't know who you are, only some meddlesome pest. But there's only one person that can take these children from me, and unless he comes to get them, I'm keeping them forever." At that, the children began to cry. They knew they were in trouble, and there seemed to be no way out. This little boy in purple had done all that he had done for them, but what was he against this towering dark angel who was intent on keeping them forever? The angel began to laugh, a hideous, angry, hateful laugh. Suddenly, he lunged at the little boy in purple who was standing in front of the other children. But then something happened that not a single child there will ever forget, even if they live to be 1,000,000 years old. The little boy in purple didn't flinch, duck, or blink at the charging angel. He simply held out one small hand, and the dark angel fell from the air and landed at his feet with his face in the ground as if he were worshiping this small child. The children behind him could see the back of his head. They could see his shabby purple clothing. They could see his small outstretched hand. They would have expected to see a smooth, tiny, unblemished hand. The hand of a child who's seen nothing worse than long days of play. But instead they saw a mark, as if that tiny hand had been driven through with a sharp object and never completely healed. After what seemed like hours, but was really only seconds, the man turned and spoke to them. No, I didn't actually use the wrong word. I actually meant to say the man. For the little boy in purple was gone, and in his place was a man in purple, the kindest looking man any of them had ever seen. The mark seen in the back of his hands was on the front of his hands as well as he turned. The dark angel behind him was still bowed with his face to the ground as if he couldn't move. You never should have come out here into this forest, the man said. You disobeyed. You went where you weren't allowed to go, he said, scolding them. But to these children it sounded like the sweetest words ever spoken. He continued, I watched over you the entire way. The destroyer wanted you to die out in this forest. But I loved you and I've come for you. You've chosen me over him. And now I ask, will you follow me anywhere at all? In less than a second, every child bowed before him and gave him their promise to follow him all the days of their life. And then suddenly a light began to shine around them so very bright that they all had to shut their eyes tight against it. When each of them finally opened their eyes, the sunlight was streaming in his or her window. They were all in their own beds, in their own homes, and each one awoke singing the exact same song. Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world.